If you look at the Odyssey, one of the major themes of that is the return of Odysseus to his family, his wife and his son Telemachus. And you can see across Christopher Nolan's films this interest of men who have lost their family, and either they're unable to get back to that family or they're working really hard to get back to that family. So there are certain films that have kind of lost wives that they can't get back to. So if you think about Memento, the central character's wife has been murdered. If you look at a film like Inception, the Leonardo DiCaprio's character has this wife who's committed suicide, and his grief is kind of causing him to interfering with his mission. And you have a number of films about fathers trying to get back to their families, especially their children. So even a film like The Prestige, you have the Christian Bale character undergoing sacrifices at the end in order to get back his daughter, who's been taken by the Hugh Jackman character. But Interstellar is sort of like the film about a father and his daughter and trying to come back to her. Because the whole thing with the Matthew McConaughey character is that he's promised his daughter that he's going to come back to her despite going out to the deep reaches of space and past into a black hole. But he somehow manages to come back to her at the end. This idea of like overcoming incredible obstacles to sort of like regain a lost family is something that we see across a lot of Christopher Nolan films and will fit in really well with his approach to the Odyssey. One other thing you can say about the Odyssey, this is about a character who, achieves incredible things against great difficulty. His version of the Odyssey, they're going to go back to the Trojan War and kind of talk about the Trojan horse and how Odysseus was like key for ending this multi-year war. And then overcomes this great difficulty to get back home. And you can kind of look at other Christopher Nolan films about men who have this obsession to accomplish these projects that seem almost impossible, whether that's sort of like the perfect magic trick in The Prestige, or it's to kind of like save life on Earth in Interstellar, or win a war in backwards time in Tenet. I think one of the interesting things about the Odyssey is, how it kind of deals with this idea of the passage of time. That Odysseus has been away for such a long time, and he comes back to his family, and there's the whole question of, is this even Odysseus? Penelope actually has to kind of test him, and he has to test her. Is their marriage still strong after all this time has elapsed? Time is this major obsession in Christopher Nolan's films, and you see that in films like Memento and Tenet and Interstellar, and thinking about how relationships endure or change because of this sort of large distances in time. I think that will sort of play into his approach to the Odyssey as well. So I'm really excited that Christopher Nolan is adapting the Odyssey, because one area that he struggled with in his filmmaking is female characters. If you look at his films, they've always kind of centered on men, and often their motivation has been a woman. The women focus more as this plot device, a motivation, rather than being these fully fleshed out characters. So if you think about, the wife in Memento or in Inception, they're both dead. They don't get to be kind of fleshed out, interesting characters. So in The Prestige, Hugh Jackman's wife dies, and that becomes like the motivation for him wanting to get revenge on Christian Bale. But she herself isn't this kind of fleshed out character. I think what's interesting about the Odyssey is that you actually do have this incredibly complex, interesting character of Penelope. In a lot of ways, she is a character who is as clever as Odysseus, that she makes this promises to the suitors that, when she finishes the tapestry, that's when she will wed someone, but she undoes the tapestry every night. She manages chooses to somehow be a good hostess, which is incredibly important in ancient Greek culture, while maintaining an arm's length from the demands of the suitors. So Penelope is this kind of fully fleshed out, interesting character. You also have people like Circe's, both antagonist figures as well. So it'll be interesting to see what he does with that in the film. Very often his films are original scripts co-written with his brother. And I think it's interesting that he's doing an adaptation, and I think doing an adaptation where he has to kind of adopt another person's point of view will actually sort of push him towards things like having kind of more complex female characters. Christopher Nolan has made films that have been set in the past. I mean, we have Dunkirk, we have Oppenheimer, we have The Prestige, but all of those are kind of more recent past. This is the first time he's had a film that's set in the distant past, and not simply the distant past, but this kind of mythological past. The Odyssey is not history. It was already in its time kind of mythological history. But this idea of kind of taking a time period that is so distant from us, that has a different kind of worldview, I think that will kind of push his perspective, because, he is somebody like all of us, somebody who lives in the 21st century. His films are often kind of like very much future oriented. The idea of speculative fiction as part of his work. This is a film that's kind of like looking backwards, like where did we come from? And that kind of different perspective, I think, will be really kind of fascinating what he does with that. Christopher Nolan has worked in a lot of genres that have these kind of fantastical elements to them, whether that be through things like superheroes or through kind of speculative fiction with things where time travel is possible. This will be the first time he's dealing with the idea of mythology, of, that the unusual things happen in the world, not because of kind of science, but because of the gods. A lot of his films do seem to be kind of grounded in a kind of science and a kind of materialistic view of the world. When I first heard that he was directing the Odyssey, I was kind of worried that they'd kind of strip away all of the magical materials. From what I've heard so far, from the cast list and from the trailers, is, they'll actually have goddesses. They'll actually have, a cyclops. Hopefully Circe's will be turning his sailors into pigs. Hopefully we'll be seeing sea monsters, because I would actually like to see this kind of world where he's kind of taking elements of the fantastic, but in his very sort of grounded, rooted style, combining those two things together. Yeah, my hope is that the mythological aspect will really kind of push Nolan to give us a view of the world that pushes against his inclination towards kind of more of the scientific, that he reinvest a little bit of the fantastical, the spiritual into his work. Over the last few decades, a lot of people have predicted the death of cinema. Christopher Nolan proves that cinema is still an incredibly lively, ongoing art form. I'm really looking forward to seeing The Odyssey, because Christopher Nolan is taking this ancient work and bringing it up into the modern era with the technology and the storytelling possibilities of cinema, proving that cinema is not a dying art form. It's living, it's creating new things, it's interacting with the past while laying out a future for itself.